Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be chatting about TRESS of the Emerald Sea. This will be a spoiler-filled discussion. If you want to see non-spoilers, I think a lot of us have done individual videos for non-spoiler, but we're just going to jump right into spoilers. So I wanted to start with general thoughts, and we can go kind of around as we usually do. And we'll start with Angela. What were your general thoughts about TRESS?
It was a delight. I had a lot of fun. I don't think for me it's like favorite of all time of this type of fairy tale fantasy, but it was like super fun and exactly what I needed on January 1st. So, yeah, I it reminded me of Stardust, which is like one of my favorite movies, so like that's amazing. And then it had all the Cosmere stuff that as a Cosmere fan I had fun with. So, yeah, that's me. It was a great time. Roger.
Pass it
I
off.
guess I haven't read as much fairy tale fantasy, so I just loved it. Like it was way better than I expected, and like the snark, because Brando Sando's humor can be hit or miss for me, Wayne, but like this one, it was just much better for me for whatever reason. I think maybe because it was less crude humor and was just more snarky, so I liked that a lot.
Yeah.
Patrick.
Oh, okay. I have to agree with Roger. I don't read a lot of fairy tale fantasy, and honestly, I did not expect that Sanderson could write something like this, you know. And he did it really well. I love Tress of the Emerald Sea. It was completely surprising. And by the way, uh, this Zoom chat, that the background, you can actually see Hoid's tie there, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't expect that Hoyt will be featured so many appearances in this book. I did not expect that. I mean, I approached this quite as blind as possible, but I'm genuinely surprised by everything about Chess of the Emerald Sea. Yeah, loved it.
I loved it. I am a big fan of The Princess Bride. I know a lot of people watched The Princess Bride like when they were. I guess I did watch it when I was young, but I actually had read the book when I was in high school, and I liked the book like way more than the movie. Like the movie's fun and nostalgic for me, but the book is so funny, and it like he emulates it so well, in my opinion. Sorry, I've got dogs barging in. um, Hopefully you can
In
get
your fancy house.
in my fancy house with this grand piano. This is not my house for anyone watching. I have a fake background up. Um, I I'm not surprised that Sanderson can pull this off. I feel like he does cutesy. I don't know, Roger. I was interested when you said it's like not like crude humor because I don't like associate Sanderson with crude humor. I associate him with very like PG sort of stuff. So I felt like this was right in line with that. I
Have you read
early
all of
on,
Second Era?
no, I have not read Second Era.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's referring
That's
to
what I'm
Wayne.
just coming off of.
I gotcha. I gotcha. That makes sense. I haven't read Second Era. I need to. I'm hoping to read it this year. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. And as someone who hasn't been reading a lot for a while, this was one of the first few books that's been getting me back into reading. And it was just the best pick me up. And it was hilarious. I was highlighting so much stuff, not just like Cosmere references, but also just like life quotes and stuff about like how to handle stress or children and like I don't know, it was beautiful. I loved it.
Nice. Just to break the mold, I also loved it.
You had me going there. I thought you were going to say something else.
As if there would ever be a Sanderson book that I didn't like.
Right.
I'm waiting for it to happen, maybe one day, but not today. I'm doing this thing in my reading journal this year where I use one word to describe the book, and my word for this one was joy, because it just felt so joyful. I too don't read a lot of fairy tale like fantasy, and I've neither seen nor read The Princess Bride, so I didn't have that frame of reference going into it at all. But I really, really enjoyed it, and I liked how it was Cosmere heavy without being intricate in a lot of the same ways that some of the more recent Cosmere novels like Lost Metal, Rhythm of War have been. So I really enjoyed it.
I also think I'm just going to be repeating a lot of what everyone else is saying. I thought it was also, I think joy and delightful and things like that, joyful, delightful, I think are perfect ways to describe it. It's sweet, it's adventurous, and it's kind of family friendly. I think that of all of Sanderson's Cosmere books, this is the only one that I think doesn't feel, not that it can't be enjoyed by adults, obviously, but it has that feeling of it seems as though any age can enjoy it. And I think that makes sense because he's been writing middle grade YA and adult for a long time. It's just so many of us are kind of sucked into the adult. So it's kind of nice to see a Cosmere book where he is sort of pulling everybody together. And he even said that in regards to being inspired by The Princess Bride, I think it was a family movie night. And that's kind of what it felt like. It felt like cozy, like we were gathering everybody together to have this fun adventure. So I really liked it as well. Because a few of us mentioned the Cosmere aspects, I've seen some people have different opinions about whether it's a good place to start. Without getting into Cosmere spoilers, do you feel like it's a good place to start? I would say I think it can be if you are not accustomed to maybe more intricate fantasy world building. It could be a good place to get into the Cosmere, especially if you don't read a ton of adult fantasy in general, because it has that fairy tale feel that I think a lot more people are familiar with. And I think, to Sophia's point, it doesn't feel super intricate with the Cosmere references. It just kind of feels like Hoid is blabbering and, oh, okay, whatever. I don't know what he's talking about right there, but that's fine. I don't know what this guy's talking about half the time anyway. You know, when he starts getting off on these side tangents, I think it's easy to zone out a little bit. The only time I would say maybe not the best place is if I said this in my individual review, that if you've read 1 or 2 of Mistborn Era 1, somebody's name is referenced in this book. And this is why I don't want to say that person's name yet, because I don't want to get a Cosmere spoilers. But I was kind of surprised that character's name was said. But otherwise, I would say I think it's a really good place to start. What do all of you think? We can go in the same order.
I definitely wouldn't steer someone away if they're like, yeah, this is my type of fantasy. This is where I want to try out Sanderson because this is like my trope salad. Like, this is what I like. And I do think, like,
I'm sorry, trope salad?
I don't know. I just made that up right now. I have a migraine, Jane. I don't know what my brain's doing.
Okay, we'll go with it. Trope
No,
salad.
it's fine.
I love it.
But like,
I don't like salads, Angela, so I don't like your analogy.
That's okay.
I'm just kidding.
Well, I'm just saying, if you like pirate ships, if you like fairy tales, if you like those type of things, and you want to try out a Sanderson, it's fine. Because I also think that, like, yes, if you've read Mistborn and then decide not to finish the Mistborn trilogy before picking this up, which seems like an odd life choice, but say you did that, I think you could spoil yourself. But if you read this before Mistborn, I doubt you'll remember that one name drop. Yeah. Like, yeah. I just don't think people's brains are good at noticing unless they have the context to know that it's important. Like, it's like why I think, like, people can talk about, like, really complex fantasy series, and unless you've started it, you won't notice that character name. Like, big series like Wheel of Time, Malazan, like, it's just like someone could say a name, and if I haven't started that series, I don't know who they are, what they're doing. So here, that's how it felt. And, like, I don't know. Like, there's some stuff I'm sure I didn't, like, pick up on, like, stuff with the witch and things like that at the end. And I'm like, but I still had fun. It still was tropey. Felt like a Disney movie from, like, when I was growing up. Like, it's great.
And I would say it gives you a good indication of his world building.
Oh.
It's like it's a easier way, more digestible way to consume his world building without it's not as intense as Stormlight. And it's got that humor and that lighthearted feel, and it's got the tropes, so it's easy enough to follow. And then you get a taste of how creative his world building is.
Yeah, and how it's, like, very problem-solving driven, because that's, like, a lot of his magic systems are, like, now how are you going to use this magic system to, like, get to the plot? Like, how are you using it? But that's my opinion. I mean, I don't know. I have a lot of friends who, like, this would be, like, this and Warbreaker and Elantris are, like, my entry points. It's, like, that track instead of the Mistborn Stormlight track. I don't know if you guys have tracks for people in your life, but based on who they are as readers, I have different entry points I hand them.
Yeah, what do you think, Roger?
For me, the only thing that I would be hesitant to have people start with this is it's very tonally different than pretty much anything else in the Cosmere. So I'd be hesitant because I'd be like, well, if you love this tone, you're not really going to get more of it. So I'd recommend it with caveats. I'd be like, yes, absolutely, if you really want to, but also just know that, like, the writing style and stuff is very different from his usual writing style. So just be aware that don't fall too in love with that, because then you might be disappointed if you go to other Cosmere works expecting, like, the life quote, very quotable, snarky snark stuff. It won't really be there as much.
Yeah.
I would also say, like, picking up on that, though, is if you really dislike the tone of this, you're not going to get on with, like, newer Sanderson humor at all. Like, if you read this and you disliked it, I don't necessarily think maybe Stormlight could work, but
I
this
think
is kind of where
Mistborn
his, like,
Era
tone's been
1.
going. I don't know. Because, like, I read it and I was like, oh, Leanna would hate this. Like, that's how my brain went when I read this book. Does that make sense?
Well, does Leanna love anything that's not Joe Abercrombie? Let's be honest.
I actually wonder if she would like it. Sorry, but Patrick, you got interrupted a second ago. What were you going to say?
I'm just about to mention that I agree with what Roger said, because this is totally very different to Sanderson's other books. And even in the terms of humor, maybe this is because I just came from reading The Last Metal. The humor is so different compared to what we get in Mistborn Era 2. So it is very different. And regarding spoilers, yeah, I have to agree with what Angela said. I think if you haven't started any of Sanderson's books, it's totally okay to start from here. But if you have read just the first book of Mistborn, I think this might be recommended with the caveat. It's kind of difficult to talk about Sanderson's book now because everything is so interconnected, and some aren't happy with this. Well, I'm personally happy with this because this is one of the main reasons why I love Sanderson's books. But yeah, I think I can recommend this with the caveat. Go, Jade.
So I have mixed feelings about recommending this. So, okay, about halfway through this book, I run a book club with my work, and I like nominated it for one of our book club picks. I was like, standalone. I feel like this would be a good like introduction to Sanderson. It's fun. I knew that the Princess Bride thing might hook a few people in my book club at work. And then the more I got into it, I was like, this is a lot of Cosmere stuff. And my concern is just that maybe there's so much of it that like someone who hasn't read anything else might feel like they're missing something. But because I've read it, like I don't really know how people would like if they would notice that and feel like, you know, there's all this stuff that they're talking about that doesn't seem necessary. I mean, it's relevant to the story, but not necessarily. Like, are they going to feel like they're missing out on stuff? Because even me, having read some Cosmere, I was like, I know this means something that I'm not catching. And like, I don't know, that kind of bothers me a little bit, but at the same time, I know that that is just how it is with Cosmere, and I'm okay with that. But I don't know if like someone who's never read Sanderson before, if they would notice that or not. Like, I can't really say. That being said, I did nominate it for my workbook club, and it might win. So maybe I'll have more like data points later. We'll see. But there was a lot more Cosmere in it than I was expecting.
There are a lot of people, to your point, because I think it's a good thing to mention, people outside the fantasy circle, workbook club, because there's different kinds of readers, and we're kind of all in a bubble as not just Cosmere fans, but fantasy fans and people who talk about books on BookTube. But it is a good point to bring up that outside audience. How would they respond to it? I think what is kind of fun is it's almost like an MCU movie where if you watch one of the ones that's can be watched on its own, but you see people from other things and you see all the fans getting excited and it kind of makes you want to read more. Mm-hmm. But it is hard to remove yourself from that and kind of understand a first time perspective since we can't really go back to that point. I think
it would be okay because most of the stuff mentioned is either just like gibberish and it's like, okay, what is he even saying? And I think most people wouldn't notice it, but my concern is that like people might feel like there's more to the story that they're not picking up on. But unless they're a decently seasoned reader, maybe not. I don't know. So
that or it's enticing, and then they want to know, and then they'll ask you, "Oh, these like random aeons or whatever. What are they? Where is that from?" And you can be like, "Got you. Read this other book."
Yeah.
Well, and like I think for me, the biggest Cosmere connection we only actually just got a taste of in Mistborn Era 2. So I'm still like as confused as like the average person, I think.
I did want to bring up too, there's a lot of people that have come into this from being introduced to him through his Kickstarter. So it'll be really interesting because I was a little worried that the reviews and the feelings toward this book would be like, what am I even reading? Yeah. But it seems like a lot of people who have read it for the first time have really liked it. I think going back to what Roger said, then the concern is, will they like the other stuff? I do agree. It does remind me a little of some of his young adult, not exactly the same because it doesn't have that pearls of wisdom necessarily, but I really like the Arithmetist quite a bit, and I need its sequel. I'm one of those people that's waited so long for the sequel to that one. But still, anyway, I agree that it does remind me of some of his other stuff. Sophia,
I was going to say
we...
that I was reminded a lot of Lift in this as well, but we can talk about that later.
What do you think, Sophia?
I agree with a lot of what all of you have said. I think it does depend what kind of a reader you are. If you are the kind of person that wants to be a Cosmere head, then don't read it first because you want to read it at the end. But if you're not too bothered about that and you're not super sensitive to spoilers and you're not planning to read it in tons of detail and memorize every single name that's dropped, all of that, then I say it can be a good entry point, but I think it has to either be first or last. You can kind of fit it in the middle, but then you need to be a little bit careful about how you do that, which might get a bit more complicated. I think, Jade, that's how you read it.
Yeah. So like I could pick, I've read some, I mean, I could list it all, but I'm not going to. I feel like if you read it in the middle, it just really depends on how, like, okay, basically what I'm going to say is that I think if you read it in the beginning or in the middle of your Cosmere journey, you're going to want to reread it.
Now, I want to
reread it anyways.
I do want to jump into more specific kind of spoilery thoughts now because we've been going over more general things. So I want to get into the meat of it a little bit more. I want to talk about kind of two polar opposite things. One, Hoid as the narrator, and then also just to kind of have fun, I want to talk about what are any potential criticisms that you have for it, because we're all kind of gushing, so I think it'd be fun to try to highlight those things. But we'll start with Hoid as the narrator. How did all of you feel about that? I want to start with Sophia so that she doesn't have to be like, I feel this way too at the end.
Damn.
Sorry, putting you on the spot.
That was my whole plan. No, I'm joking. I really liked Hoid as a narrator, and I think it's smart of Sanderson to do this because he knows that he wants to write from Hoid's perspective in Dragonsteel, and so he's doing something with lower stakes to kind of get used to that. And also he's playing off of the fact that we already know Hoid as a narrator and have heard stories from Hoid before. And I liked this kind of longer form version of Hoid narrating the story to us, and the whole breaking the fourth wall thing I thought was really fun. So I like Hoid, and therefore I liked him as a narrator. But I can see how if you're not a fan of Hoid, that could be a problem.
Wait, people like that exist? People don't like Hoid?
Well, I can only presume that there are some weirdos out there. I mean, like, for example, I'm not a fan of a certain character who is mentioned in this book, and that always shocks people. And I won't say who because spoilers, but so those weirdos exist.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. And I love reading Hoid as the narrator. So it's really funny, in my Patreon Discord, we had a chat going for this book, and like before it's revealed who the narrator is, I was like, oh my god, I love this narrator, he's so much fun. And then later I was like, oh my god, it's Hoid, and everyone was like, oh, I was waiting for you to get to that part. It was so funny. But I think he's hilarious, and I because I've already read The Princess Bride and loved the whole breaking the fourth wall and like the tongue-in-cheek kind of like style. I loved everything about it. And I also, like Sophia was saying, agree that it was good for Sanderson to kind of like try it out. He talks about it in his like author's note or whatever. And that was really nice to hear that he was, trying it out and just experiment. It's fun to see authors like experiment with things. And also the fact that he like wrote this for just him and his wife, like, was awesome and made it even more cute, I think. But yeah, I really enjoyed Hoid as a narrator. I love his humor, and then also just trying to pick up on all the Cosmere stuff that he mentions. Like, I highlighted so many things that I don't understand. But yeah, I loved him.
Yeah, at first I was a bit, it took me some time to get used to his narration because we are still in the middle of waiting for his origin book, right? Origin story. And that's probably one of the most important Cosmere book. At first, I was a bit worried that this would become the voice that Sanderson used to tell that book. I haven't read that author's note yet until I got to the end of the book, of course. But apparently in this book, he decided to use something like the one that he used in Stormlight, Wonder Sail, and also the Dog and the Dragon part, something like that. And I liked it after a while. I liked it. I think it's really fit to the narrative that he's going for here. And yeah, I like Hoid as the narrator.
Is it my turn? I guess that was like the one thing that I knew going into this book, that it was Hoid narrating. Like I didn't read any of the preview chapters or anything like that, but I think at some point along the way when he's talking about the secret projects, I knew that some of them were going to be stories told from Hoid, so I already knew that going in. I am personally a very sarcastic person, so the super snarky, witty stuff just speaks to my spirit. But I think as far as criticisms go, because that was the other part of our prompt, right, was that the only thing that I've heard is that some people thought that the world building was too weird, because I have like my Discord channel going for it, and that's the only complaint that I saw, that they liked the tone and they liked the story, but sometimes the world building, they just kind of felt like it went over their heads and it was too complex, which, I mean, that's kind of Sanderson, so maybe don't continue with him because he loves his weird world building.
We'll get more into criticisms in a second. I like how Roger, I was like, I think it'd be fun since we're all going to be gushing if we, and then you're like, well, other people I know said this.
Because I can't think of any. I loved it. Don't do this to me.
We'll get to criticisms in a second. Angela, what did you think as Hoid as a narrator?
I mean, actually, this is probably where my criticisms are, not because it wasn't enjoyable. Like, I do love a sarcastic, fourth wall breaking narrator. It's one of my favorite author choices in books, specifically this genre. Redemption in Indigo by Karen Lord is like a book I always talk about because it has this sassy fourth wall breaking narrator, and you have a strong character like Pama is in that book, and this is Tress, who you don't get to be as close to because you have this narrator telling the story, so you get to observe them, but you're not like with them. And I think for me, I really liked Tress, and I kind of wish, I mean, it wouldn't have happened, right? You can't have this narration and be close to Tress. It's not possible with the setup we were given. So I would have to sacrifice one thing I liked for another thing. And I think there were times when like Nettle and Bone that we love, or at least Elle and I really like, I got to really be with Mara in that book. And here I didn't get to be really with Tress in the same way, which is why I think Nettle and Bone for me in fairy tale fantasy space is stronger than this one, because I got to be with the team closer. And that's something I couldn't quite get with Hoid's sass. But like, it was still really good and enjoyable. And like, as someone who loves the Cosmere, like, yeah, I would like to understand more of this weird creature person that we've been following for literally like, what, 10, 12 years? I don't even know how long we've had Hoid around. He's just been around. So that's probably one of my things.
Kind of like the other side of the coin with fairy tale is, in my mind, I often do think of there being some distance because of the idea of someone telling you a story. And so I think that the character-driven reader in me, we still do get a lot of how Tress feels, but you're not as connected to her as Vin or Kaladin and some of his other Cosmere protagonists. And Hoid as a character, I am kind of very curious how we're going to see his origin, because how is his tone of voice going to change? Because that's obviously going to be a very different Hoid than the Hoid that we get telling the story now. And then I personally have always liked Hoid being this mysterious figure throughout the Cosmere, and there are certain moments when he shows up where he's witty, but he's like kind of clever and a little more subdued, and he's not quite as, I guess, in your face as he is in this one, and kind of ridiculous. And so it kind of makes me wonder, I liked him in this, but if I get an entire book or series where it's not just him kind of telling you the story, but we're zeroing in on him, I just kind of wonder now if I'm going to like that as much. Because I don't know, there's something about when the air of mystery's gone, then it's not. Maybe it's nice, though, because you're getting those pieces. It makes you more curious. I just don't want to get too much of the story before we get his story, if that makes sense. Because I want to feel like I'm discovering alongside. But I do feel like the positive is that a lot of times, like there are some stories, I think like Rhaeria is a good example, where you read usually the present day of that world, and then there's other stories the authors have written that go back. And so it's like Mistborn Era 1, Era 2 in reverse, where it'd be like if you read Era 2 first and then you got the lore, I kind of feel like we'll get that as Hoid. But literally him as the narrator, I thought was fun. There was a couple times where the humor was, I don't want to say it was immature. It was just very youthful. And there was a couple times where it was, and I don't say this in a bad way. I just mean like it felt like dad humor. So it was cute as like I think kids would laugh at this and giggle at this, but I don't know that I'm necessarily giggling, but it still makes me happy for children. But
I also
around,
think that it was like dad jokes that adults would catch. Like at one point he makes a joke about like calling children, I don't know, heathens or devils or something. And I just thought it was hilarious.
As a mom of a toddler.
My mom loves Sanderson's humor, and when I told her that it's a big point of contention in the fandom if people like his humor, she's like, how do people not like his she cackles on airplanes, like she cannot be stopped while reading a Sanderson book. So it works for parents a lot, I think.
Parent humor is probably better. It captures, because moms can have really silly humor too, right? Okay, criticisms. And then I want to see what everybody's main thing. I know one of you was saying you felt like it didn't feel as finalized and it was more of a raw feeling, which I guess could be considered a pro to some people. But I'm curious we'll start with Sophia again. Sophia, what would be your criticisms?
It kind of bounces off the point that Roger was making before. I think that the magic system isn't as well explained in this Sanderson book as in some of his others. Like Mistborn is just a magic system that is so well explained and so easy to understand and so vivid. And this, like for example, the Spore Sea, I think it relies on you knowing about this whole fluidization thing before, which I didn't. I'd already finished the book, then I realized that that's what it was based on, and then I went and watched a video about it and I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. So I think that would be my one criticism, that it's not his usual level of explanation in terms of how things are working. Maybe that's because it's shorter, and maybe it's because, as I said, he's relying on some knowledge already, but I just don't think it's as well done as he has done in other books.
I think that's true.
Yeah, I do think that's true. I think that's partially because it's so short, but I also don't think it's necessary to understand like the main, just like, I don't know what you're talking about with the fluidization thing. Like I think I might know, but I haven't looked into it, and I don't like, I feel like that probably went over my head. I think a lot of things went over my head, even as someone who's read some Cosmere, but it's like it wasn't necessary for me to enjoy the book. It just makes me want to go back and reread it when I know more, sort of thing. So I could see where that criticism is coming from. I have a hard time coming up with something for this just because I wholeheartedly like really enjoyed it. Maybe my only criticism is I like guessed the twist. But
you can say what the twist is because spoilers.
Yeah, so I guessed who Charlie was, or that Huck was Charlie or whatever. At some point, well, and part of that I think is because of the whole Princess Bride setup, because if you've seen the Princess Bride, like her lover that gets sent away is someone who you don't expect later in the story or whatever. And at some point I was like, wait, is Hoid Charlie? And then I was
wondering that too. I'm glad you said that.
At some point, well, because he was cursed, right? And I was like, but I was like, no, Hoid is like such a big like part of the Cosmere. Like that doesn't make sense. Like this can't. Well, and like I knew this wasn't like his origin story, and I was like, oh, that's not right. Yeah. And then as we got closer to the end, I was like, oh, it's Chuck. It's got to be Chuck. And I was like, am I crazy? But I went ahead and like put it in my Discord. I was like, I'm putting this out there. And then like 30 minutes later, I was like, I was right. Because I guess that. So, I mean, I'm sure that wasn't like super, I think it was obvious for other people as well. So like usually Sanderson has like big twists that are like hard to guess, at least for me. And so the fact that I guessed this one was a little bit like maybe a criticism that was like too obvious, but at the same time, I'm fine with it.
I have seen people that have said, how did everyone guess that? Am I the only one that didn't guess it? So
no,
I wonder.
You did?
I wonder if. Well, and Sophia mentioned never seeing The Princess Bride, so I wonder if
maybe that was a big influence for me.
That's probably a big influence because that's a movie a lot of people have seen and loved. So that could be. All right, Patrick, The person who always leaves really thorough reviews. What were your criticisms?
No, I haven't watched Princess Bride too, so I'm in the same boat
Okay.
as Sophia. I haven't watched it, I haven't read it, but my issue is also kind of similar to Sophia. Plus one more. I don't think the magic was as well explained as his other books, but I think this is again just because the book is too short. But my personal minor issue is that I don't like seafaring book. I usually don't like seafaring book. It's just the sea, and that's it. But that only happened in the middle of the book. I think after a while, I really got used to the pacing, and that's pretty much the only criticism I had. The humor, as I said, surprisingly worked quite well with me because I do not like Liv. I think she's one of the most annoying person in the Cosmere. But
Me
yeah,
too.
yeah.
If Alex were here, he would be right there with us.
And that's my unpopular opinion is that I love Lift. So
I love Lift too. I'm with you,
She
Jade.
makes me hate pancake. She makes me hate pancake. But yeah, the humor here actually kind of worked with me. So yeah, I think my minor issue is only the seafaring stuff is a bit too long. I didn't expect it. Yeah.
All right, Roger, you got it. Did you come up with something?
I mean, it's not a criticism of the book. I think it's more just a complaint that I like wanted to see, just like Sophia, more of the magic because we only saw like half of the spores on this planet, and so there's like a lot of unanswered questions that I don't think we're ever getting.
I was gonna say, doesn't that mean that we're gonna get more later though? Like that makes me excited. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
So long. He has so many books that he's already started.
No, I think
So
he
I feel
said
like-
that he's planning on dealing with the spores in Dragonsteel. So
Well, I know that
gonna
it's
come
connected
back
to ethers,
the
and that's like
spores.
more Cosmere wide.
Yeah.
But like on this specific planet with these weird water activated spores, what did the other 5 or 6 do? Because we saw like 5 or 6 of them. Like, I wanted to know more. So I guess that would be my biggest complaint. But also, I don't know that this would have worked in a longer format. I don't know if his snarky snark would have been as fun if it was 8, 9, 1,000 pages. Like, I don't know that people would have liked it.
Bye, Patrick. Patrick has to go soon because it's very late where he is. He has plans, fun plans.
Nah, it's just celebrating Lunar New Year here. So yeah.
Happy New Year, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy New Year.
Have a good time, all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye. We'll miss you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, Angela.
So I have more comments based off things people have been saying. So I will say, having a physics background and being science-minded, the fluidization, fluid mechanics are really complicated, even if you understand them. But like, I got the hand waviness of it. I was able to be like, oh, okay, cool. And I actually thought about, haven't put in my brain cells to do it, making a science behind the magic for that, because I also know that that's like a thing people wouldn't understand. But it also, like, to me, I'm just like, fine, sand sea. We're just going. We're on a sand sea. And I think as I've gotten older, like as a kid when I started Sanderson, I loved hard magic and I still do. But I've also grown to really like looser magic, softer magic. And I think if you don't understand it, it works really well, especially in fairy tale, of just like going with it. And we have 4 spores that we really see how they work in this book. And I got a general sense by the end what they do. Green grows, red is spiky, midnight makes spies. With what blue explodes, right? Those are what the 4 do. And that's literally all my brain did with it. So I was fine with that. I will say the minute we met Huck, I was like, oh, that's Charlie. Like the minute we met Huck.
I definitely didn't get it until way later.
Well, it's also in the conversations Huck had, but also it's just a fairy tale trope. Like he's not trying to subvert that fairy tale trope of meeting it. And also
that's why I thought it might be Hoid, because I was like, that's the trope, right? But I was way off.
Well, and like for me, it was also, again, I know this was based off Princess Bride and everyone's comparing it to that, and I have seen it and read it, but I don't love it as much. In Stardust, the main romance lead turns into an animal at one point, and she so, and it's on a pirate ship in Stardust. I'm just saying there's a lot of crossover with Stardust. So, and I mean, I think for me, that was a thing where I'm like, I don't think I was supposed to catch this early, but I don't really care because now I'm catching all the things I would have caught on reread in Huck's conversations where it's so obvious. Yeah, you're talking about your father and the kingdom. Like,
yeah, now I'm
that
jealous.
was okay. I didn't need there to be a twist, but it is something I've also just noticed with me and Sanderson as I've read more and more of his books. I can
And
just
see
kind
the
of
twists.
tell his signs. Like he has a certain formula, which is fine, but it's just, after a while, we've all read like 10 plus of his books. Like we're eventually going to notice how he sets up a scene and things like that. So,
And I still don't.
yeah, well, and sometimes you don't, but like, there have been some Stormlight books where it's like, yes, I saw that coming. Or like in Rhythm of War, there was like a science magic part of it that like I saw coming, but that was exciting to piece apart and get there before. So like, it doesn't matter to me anymore if I catch them or not. But I do think that being distant from Tress and Huck and the people on the pirate ship, I mean, I did love that he called everyone Doug, so we didn't get over bogged down with all the people. I thought that was really funny.
Even the women, like I didn't catch that at first. I just assumed they were all men, and then later he mentioned that like he used she/her pronouns for a Doug, and I was like, oh, there's women on this boat too. Everyone's just a Doug. It was funny.
So I do think it's just there was a distance between me and the team on the ship, and for me, I would have wanted to feel closer, but I don't know how that would have happened. And so that's the 0.5 stars this didn't get. That was it. It's just I wasn't quite there.
We must have such different reading experiences because I'm more like Sophia. Like when I'm reading a book, I'm just in the book. I'm not necessarily like my brain is not firing on all cylinders. I'm not like looking for all these connections. I'm just in it for the story. And like I very rarely have that moment where I'm like sitting there trying to predict or do any of that kind of stuff. So like I didn't call the twist, but I wasn't thinking about it either. And I read it practically in one sitting.
I do that on reread.
Yeah.
I will say my brain wasn't thinking, find the twist. My brain was just reading the book and Huck showed up and I didn't even ask the question, could Huck be someone else? I was just like, oh, Huck is Charlie. Like I don't know why. My brain just decided.
So I found, and we've been kind of touching on this. So this book for me, as far as, I guess, potential criticisms and kind of going off of what Sophia said in regards to the magic, this didn't really feel like a book with any magic. It just felt like a book with a really, really complex world. So, because there wasn't necessarily a system where, oh, now I have all these really cool powers. I mean, you saw magical beings here and there, but it very much felt like the evil sorceress who has some kind of magic we don't understand or something like that, where you're not actively using it in pursuit of whatever the task is you're trying to accomplish. It's not like taking down the Lord Ruler or the thing. And Stormlight's magic is more you're discovering it. But I didn't really feel like we were actively using magic necessarily. We were using aspects of the world. So it had a feeling of magic, but this to me felt more science fiction almost than fantasy. It was like a science fiction fairy tale in a sense, but we're just, I think, so accustomed to science fiction feeling futuristic or feeling like we're trying to break down almost a dystopia type of let's reflect on our own society, but in this like a Red Rising sort of thing where this doesn't really like that. It was a really complex world, but it felt magical and you could do interesting things with it. But I don't know if I quite would categorize that as a criticism. It's just something that I did kind of miss magic being a tool for us to utilize. I think my criticism is funny because a lot of us were talking about how, well, it's too short to really dive too deep into all the other aspects of the world. There were a couple times that I felt like it was a little repetitive and I kind of was ready for us to move on. And I did like kind of going to the different areas, when they go to the one place where now they're fearful of storms because they can happen at any point and things like that. That was exciting. The dragon aspect was exciting, but there was a little chunk in between where I felt like, all right, now we just got to now we need to talk to this character and get a little bit about them. And then this next chunk is going to be getting more about this character. And it just felt like I was ready to move on, I guess, with Tress's story to some degree. So I think to me it felt a little, I don't know if it was the seafaring thing that Petrick was talking about that made it feel that way, but I did feel like there was a hint of it being somewhat repetitive. But was there anything else? Because we've kind of been talking about world and magic. Was there anything else in regards to the world and magic that you wanted to touch on?
I mean, I think the magic relies on other books because like when we got into the real magic, it was like the Elantrian magic system. So like it kind of relied on you having some context if you wanted to understand more about that magic, because otherwise it would have probably just felt like very like, woo.
I will say, I think it's interesting, Elle, how you brought up you wish we were using it more as a tool when like that was my favorite part was when Tress was experimenting, which you're right, there's a lot of experimentation and engineering going on with how Tress approaches the spores and using them to make new contraptions. So like I really enjoyed that problem solving aspect of it. It reminded me a bit of like Foundry Side, where they do similar things with their magic system. It's like this is a tool. It's not an innate part of a person. Like a person doesn't have the ability to access it.
I think that's the difference, and you're right that they use it, and it is more tool-like, and that it's like outside of them. But for me, it's more of like nobody's ingesting anything or like getting powers from something. I think but that's a good distinction.
I was going to say earlier when you said that it felt more like science versus magic, I always feel that way about Sanderson. Like all of his magic to me feels like science. And that's one thing that I like. I mean, I guess part of that is just innate in having like a hard magic system. But like, I don't know, just even with like the Mistborn magic, you're ingesting something, but it's still like chemicals and it has, I don't know. I
feel it's more science fiction. Because I agree that a lot of his magic systems feel more scientific and that there's very clear rules and limitations. But no, that's an important distinction too. Because I just feel like, because Stormlight has that sci fantasy feel as well. And I think this one really leaned into the entire world and how they live is so determined by the environment. But that didn't really feel like magic to me. It felt like science fiction.
I felt like the spores felt like magic to me. It wasn't until the very end when we meet the witch that I was like, whoa, this turned real sci-fi at the end. Because there was like a laptop and a spaceship and like all this stuff. I was like, wow.
What does Hoid end up calling them? Because he says laptop. He's like, oh, wait, I mean, this interesting, like he corrects himself.
Yeah, he did call it something else. But it wasn't until we got that far into the book that I really felt that the world felt sci-fi to me. And the spores and the seas felt like magic up until that point. But I did like the experimenting and stuff as well. I feel like there was something else I was going to say. It's not just the Elantrian magic. I feel like this book had references to lots of different magic in the Cosmere. Yeah. And like, I thought that was really, but that's like one of those things that you wouldn't really connect unless you've read and there was things that I didn't really understand either. Like, okay, the green spores reminds me a lot of like Lift and stuff. And so now I want to go back and reread that stuff to like make those connections. I think especially because he kept using the word verdant. I feel like he uses that word a lot in the Lift book, but maybe I'm wrong. And then also even like the black inky spy, I feel like that's like a reference to something else that I've seen before. At the very end, whenever the witch takes I'm going to call it a glamour. That's not what it is. The light weaving. He even said like light weaving. And so like, there's like, and he talked about different bonds, like the Lewin bond versus the something other bond. And like, those are all different magic systems. And so it's like, it referenced multiple of the other Cosmere magic systems, which I thought was really interesting.
I do want to get more into Cosmere connections because I think
hopefully what I said wasn't too spoilery.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
I mean,
at all.
You used words that the book had.
Right, exactly.
And like Angela said, it's not like somebody's going to be like, now I know, because it's all if you haven't read it. But to add to that really quick, even I feel like the way that they talk about different things counteracting the spores.
There was one thing about push and pull, and when I was reading it, it was a capital P, and I was like, oh.
And I really quick want to point out this. Do you think the book would have been perceived differently if it had been a normal Cosmere release? So I think this is an interesting question. I think the way that he's been very transparent and open about how he went about this, I think if he just all of a sudden released this book, I think a lot of us would be really confused because we'd be like, I mean, a lot of people are like, where's Stormlight 5? And I'm like, I think 3 years is an understandable amount of time to take for those massive books. But I think if it had just been released, I still think a lot of us would have liked it, but I think we would have been kind of confused.
I do think if I wasn't in the book community, I know exactly how I would respond because it probably would have been the same as when I saw Warbreaker on the shelf. I would just go to my bookstore whenever it was released and I'd be like, oh, there's a new Sanderson book? I didn't hear about this. And I would have just read it and been really happy. But that's how it was with Warbreaker. So
thank you for this. You just finished reading it right before this. So thank you.
Yeah. And I love the part where, because I didn't realize that, I forgot his name, but the deaf guy, his eventually I was like, oh, that's like a tablet that he can. So once I got to the sci-fi part in the laptop, I was like, oh, that puts a whole different light on this stuff. Fort, yes.
Yeah.
I love
Anyway,
Fort.
so kind of dual questions here at this point. Would you have felt differently / anything else with the world and magic that you wanted to highlight really quick? We started to get into Cosmere connections. I think everybody feel pretty good about those.
Yeah.
I don't know if I wanted to get into Cosmere connections just yet, because I did want to talk a little bit about the characters themselves. And if you had any favorite scenes or any favorite quotes or standout moments, and then the themes I think tie to likely whatever your favorite scene is, or the standout moments are probably tied to the themes. I just think the end where it was very much about growing as a person, and then her recognizing if this is Charlie, then maybe Charlie and I, maybe we're not meant to be together because we were so youthful and young and we had this very innocent love. But then when you experience life and it changes you and you feel like you realize what you want out of life and what you want for yourself, is that going to match? And it was nice that he had, grown along the way. I think it would have been very almost disheartening and completely just a blindside if he had decided to be really cynical and be like, they're not going to be together now, because that would have felt kind of edgy, a little edgelordy, I think, if he had not had that. Not that it has to have a happily ever after, but I think it would have been, it kind of would have not, for me, fit the tone of the rest of the book if just all of a sudden.
I was going to say, like, with this type of story, I feel like you do need a happily ever after, because otherwise it doesn't fit with the rest of the story.
And not that a character can't be happy, like discovering themselves. And I think maybe you can have commentary, of course, about, and this isn't me trying to refute what you just said. I agree with what you said. It's not that you can't have a character be happy, enjoying life. And if that means enjoying life alone for now, like that's happy too. It doesn't have to be, oh, we got married in the end and we lived happily ever after. But I really like that so much of the story was rooted in this very sweet love that they had for one another. And then that sweet love that they both still had that even through their growing throughout the story. So to me, it was like the perfect happily ever after, because they've kind of discovered themselves. They've discovered it's okay to need to rely on each other. There's some subversion of tropes that we usually see of who gets rescued and how it's okay to be rescued, but it's why you're being rescued in the first place. And so I liked all those things. And then for them to get their happily little ever after love story also, I just think it is almost extra sweet bow, perfectly tied bow. But I quite liked it, actually. I think that's part of what made it so joyful and delightful. Sorry, I kind of took over. So whatever everybody else has to say about that too. Favorite themes and quotes and things like that.
Well, I'm not. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say I'm not really a quotes girly, so I don't have any of that to share. But two things. So first thing is that I really thought that it was good and very clever the way that Sanderson decided to have Huck be Charlie, because as we were kind of getting to that point where she was going to find the witch, I was thinking, they're not going to really be on the same level anymore, because she's gone through all of this stuff, this big adventure, and he's going to be stuck, the way he was at the beginning of the book. And so doing that, it brought them back onto that level. So I thought that was really clever. And then I really enjoyed this, really basic, but just like right at the beginning of the book, where Charlie is pretending to be, was it like the gardener or something? And it's obvious to us as the reader that he's not the gardener, and it's obvious to Tress that he's not the gardener, and it's obvious to Charlie that it's obvious to Tress that he's not the gardener. And I'm not just like, this is hilarious without being obviously hilarious. We're not saying anything funny, but it's still hilarious. So I really enjoyed that.
It was adorable.
Yeah.
I just thought they were
adorable.
really cute. And I think I would have been critical of this book if we didn't see any of Charlie, but by having Charlie be Huck, then you actually get to see the love interest, because that's one of the downsides to a lot of these styles of fairy tales is who even is this person that they're supposedly in love with, and why do they love them so much? And I do feel like you see that throughout the story, and so I quite like that. And I just want to say a silly quote that's right at the beginning is when Hoid is talking about more people should talk to their parents about these kinds of things. I think all of us who are so accustomed to fantasy characters who have parents, just they might as well not even be there. So just use the trope of them being an orphan so we don't have to, like when parents just mean nothing to the characters. So I did like that silly little quote. Sorry, Jade has some actual quotes.
I
She
do.
is a little
I have
more of
my
a quote
Kindle
girly.
highlights pulled up on my computer. Some of them
I have
are
mine
just
up
like
too. Like,
I don't have my book, but I do have my moments when it's my turn, so I have something at least.
And what's funny is I'm usually not a quote collector either, but there were just such good gems in this one. Some of them that I saved were like Cosmere stuff, but there was the one about him calling kids sociopaths. Where did that go? Because, well, parents have to say things like that. They're required to see the best in their children. Otherwise, living with these little sociopaths would drive a person mad. I thought that was hilarious. There was the one about heroes, or like how they do the things they do for their friends or something. It's towards the end. So much Cosmere stuff.
I did like too that Hoid, as critical as he is of basically everyone, he seemed to genuinely admire TRESS. TRESS being an ordinary but obviously good person. And I think he respected that pureness in her, which was
the moment
kind of
when
sweet to
Hoid
see.
goes, and then Tress did a thing that no one ever does. She thought.
That was hilarious.
I had to tell Ryan, I'm like, Ryan, you need to know that this character just chose to use 4 brain cells instead of 2.
That's hilarious. There was also a few quotes about memory, and I love thinking about memories and how like our experiences and memories make us like who we are. So here's one. It says, memory is often our only connection to who we used to be. Memories are fossils, the bones left by the dead versions of ourselves. If we let it, memory can make shadows of the now, and nothing can match the legends of our past. Enjoy memories, but don't be a slave to who you wish you once had been. I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, always a sucker for a good memory theme.
I know. This one was funny. The story about the king's tosher, and then like later he says to Tress, "Have you heard the story about the king's tosher? I don't really remember it, but it has poop in it, so it must be funny." I thought that was hilarious.
See, that's the kind of humor that I'm like, somebody will find that funny, and it's you.
Yeah. And probably Angela's mom.
And Angela's mom, yeah.
Yeah.
Or little kids too, or my husband, I feel like, maybe. I don't know. Depends. It's one of those situations where it fluctuates when that kind of stuff is funny, because he probably would think it was immature, but then anytime we need to look up how something's pronounced, an actual word, he always ends up typing that in and pressing play and then starts giggling, and I'm like, of course. So yes, there is that humor that's in, I feel like, a lot of us. You said you found another.
This one, fun tip: being told "I kept you in the dark to protect you" is not only frustrating but condescending as well. It's a truly economical way to demean someone. If you're looking to fit more denigration into an already busy schedule, give it a try.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the heroes.
Sarah J. Maas needs to hear that.
I think that there's a certain group of individuals that think another group of individuals needs to be protected constantly, and you're like,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so that one definitely stood out to me. Here's the one about heroes that I was actually looking for. Heroes are the ones who have thought about what they're going to do and who have trained to do it. Heroism is often the seemingly spontaneous result of a lifetime of preparation. But if you ask these heroes why they risk their lives, don't do it on a stand in front of a crowd while you give them a blah, 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 blah. Okay. Even for their ideals, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Consistently across cultures, eras, and ideologies, war heroes report the same simple motivation. They did it for their friends. Oh, that's so sweet.
So cute.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop now, but I have a bunch more.
Roger, maybe you'll have some of the ones that Jade is not reading off.
I don't know. Like, it was just interesting to me because the quotes in the beginning were more like funny quotes. So then as we went on, it shifted to be more like life quotes, which I just thought was an interesting choice. Like one of the things that I chuckled at in the very beginning was he was 6.5 feet tall and had a jaw so straight it made other men question if they were. And I was just like, okay. And then and then one of the like life quotes, I guess, was like one that was about anxiety, and it was worry, it might be said, is the carrion feeder of emotions, drawn to other better emotion like crows to a battlefield. And I was just like, that spoke to me because I've just been going through anxious brain with my thesis and stuff like that.
Yeah. You'll make it. But you are me last year.
Yeah.
For me, I have Tress's journey. I think her resilience, her persistence, her ingenuity, I just really liked it, especially because it does come up from a place of she is above average, but she's not like the genius. She doesn't have these like, you can't reach these things. Like a person with good intentions can be Tress. You know, like you have to work still, like that's everything in life, but like you can be Tress if you want to be. And I really love that. I loved the moment where the I forget the name of the person who steers the ship, but she got to steer the ship for a while. Like I loved how she felt in that moment. I love when she got to make the vine tower that saved them in the Red Sea. And then a small moment, but you know, the friend who always wanted to shoot guns and cannons but couldn't do it, when she got her glasses and like she could then see, because this whole time she just is nearsighted. Like obviously you also still have to get better, but like her moment of getting to do the shot that worked was just like,
Yeah,
there were just
that
a
was
lot of
awesome.
really well executed cliche but cinematic things that like landed for me, even if they were cliche, because they were cliche in the way it's like they're cliche because they're good, but only if you give me buy-in to make it work, if that makes sense. And I felt like that was really there for so many moments in the story.
I did
Yeah.
like, I know somebody was mentioning earlier that they feel like there's a lot of build up to the dragon, and the dragon scene was not that exciting, but I really liked that scene. I liked her being like, what am I going to do? I brought you her. And then she's just trying to do the exact same thing.
That's
That
like
I did not
talking
see
to a
coming.
sphinx. That's like classic. That's
Yeah.
so fairy tale.
Yeah, I really
loved it.
liked that moment. And like just the dragon, it was such a, again, kind of like almost tropey version of what we think of, but I did still love the interaction with the dragon. And then I kind of liked that this book, there are villainous characters. There's the captain, and there's obviously the sorceress, and you could say to some degree that the dragon or like the world itself is almost the antagonist. But I could see this being a criticism for some people where they feel like, oh, the villain was not a very good villain. We don't even see them very much. But this book is so much more about these little moments that all of you have been pointing out, and this growth of the character, that it doesn't really feel like it requires an antagonist to be fully fleshed out, because it's more about the character. It's like the presence of something to overcome is all you need to facilitate the further development of the main character. So I didn't really feel like I needed the sorceress to be super fleshed out. I didn't feel like I needed all these explanations. Plus, clearly she's not related really to this world. But
also, I think selfishness as an antagonistic force is actually something we think is shallow, but it's why we have so many issues we have with people in the world. Like our
Very
antagonists are all
realistic.
very self-centered and greedy, and you know.
Yeah.
I don't think that's that surface level. I think that's just like sometimes that's what is the driving force behind someone doing bad things, is they are self-centered and selfish.
I think that this book at first glance doesn't seem like it's maybe as, it's not going to have as much depth as something like Stormlight, where you're diving so into the trauma of these characters and things like that. But I do kind of feel like in a way, the whole book is about the growth of a character. And I don't know, I really liked that. And so I didn't mind, again, to your point too. I mean, yeah, there are sometimes just, there are surface level motivations, and that's all that does sort of make someone bad. But I just enjoyed that we didn't need to create this whole story, because what would that have added to this book? That's so not the purpose of this book.
Well, and it's so short that like putting that stuff in, I think, would have made it so much longer too.
Yes, because then I feel like
makes it. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like it makes it more accessible depth. So you've got the depth of Stormlight Archive, which I love, but it's not as accessible as in this one for a whole plethora of reasons: the writing style, the length of the book, the way that they're approached. It just makes it easier.
See, this makes me happy. I think that is why this book is resonating too with so many people. Is YA books I really enjoy, and I feel like this could be considered young adult. I feel like this could be considered middle grade, but I do think that within these various different age ranges, while it's nice because it helps people figure out where books are that they're likely going to enjoy, it also can sometimes be a negative because then we feed into certain trends, and this happens in adult all the time too. We feed into certain trends, or we are trying to fit that specific demographic, and something like this, it's enjoyable to us, but then it makes us happy knowing that our children or nieces and nephews or just other young people, we can just see them, the joy that it would give them, and then that just keeps giving joy to us. It's just wholesome, and I feel like that's why in my review I said it almost transcends age range, which is a silly way to put it. I do have to say, just a little part of me that's like a tiny bit frustrated with the way people sometimes stick their noses up at things for younger readers. I absolutely would love if this is released, because Sanderson is the one that pushed for Mistborn to be in young adults. I would love if he pushed for this to be in middle grade, or pushed for this to be in young adult as well. And I would like it if we stopped looking at Sanderson as the exception to wonderful stories and wonderful wholesome stories. I hope that seeing this leads people to respect all the other kind of cozier fantasy that's out there. Anyway, sorry. I feel like there's a part of me that always is just like, let's just be more kind and open to what other people enjoy and what makes other people happy. And let's not just make Sanderson the exception, because there are other people writing cozy fantasy. There are other people writing really sweet, fun fairy tale fantasy. And yeah, we're all fans of Sanderson. So we're probably, well, those of us in this chat. So we're probably going to enjoy this, but what I'm hoping, because he himself, when in discussing Skyward, that series with him, he seems to also be really frustrated with the way people decide that something is lesser. And I just think that when you decide something's lesser, that is something a young person is enjoying, that just crushes that love for reading. I mean, we're talking about a person that's in their most malleable form, and you're telling them that the thing they don't like, or the thing they like, isn't worth liking, or they shouldn't like it. Anyway, so I hope that this maybe brings more love to just all forms of stories, I guess. That was that got like too over the top, I think, but
I feel like there's a good chance it could though. And this was something I wanted to speak about before we get into the Cosmere stuff, because I think that's a rabbit hole that we'll end up never coming out of. But the tone and the narrative style of TRESS is actually really, really similar to the Alcatraz series by Sanderson. I don't know if any of you have read that, but I just finished reading it this month. And it is very similar. It does that break the fourth wall thing. It has the snarky humor that you've mentioned, Roger, as well. And I feel like Sanderson is aware of that and plays into that a little bit. And because it's Sanderson, and I don't feel like he ever does stuff by mistake, it's always intentional. There is actually, I can't remember which Alcatraz book it is. It's one of the last couple, I think. But he does this isn't a spoiler for Alcatraz at all, but he does this thing where he's talking about how he doesn't think it's fair that chapters just get numbers. They deserve names too. So he starts giving his chapters like random names, and one of the chapter names is actually Doug. So I think maybe that's me reading too much into it, but I feel like that's a connection that he's making, that yes, I'm aware that this is kind of on a similar level. So if you haven't read Alcatraz and you really liked TRESS and the tone and the narrative style, then I definitely recommend Alcatraz for that.
I have the first one, so that makes me excited to hear that it's similar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It reminded me a little bit. It doesn't do the breaking of the fourth wall quite to the extent, but I recently read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which is another one I feel like it can be appealing to a lot of different ages. And I hope that this also brings about more of the wholesome, fun, youthful stories and not just like the angsty, because that is a trend right now. I feel like that's partially a trend because publishing knows adults like to read the young adults age range. And so adults are like, but I want more spice, or I want there to be more tension. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, if you like that, it makes sense that you would want more of it. But I also kind of miss these types of stories that are sweet and wholesome and adventurous. And those kids that are go-getters who are 8, but they're like, I want to read the big kid stuff, that they can find these still really delightfully fun stories. Anyway, not to diss angst, because it's all of us, I think, enjoy it here and there. But anyway, sorry. Angela, you were starting to say something.
Well, I was going to say, like, I agree. Like, it's so weird because I don't actually read a lot of young adult. It's not a thing against the age category. It's just usually sci-fi young adult or contemporary young adult works for me, and not young adult fantasy. But I get so annoyed with how people in adult speculative spaces talk about young adult, or like will decide something feels like young adult, because they always say it in a negative way. It's like, oh, I liked this book, but it felt young adult. Like, that's always how reviewers are with certain adult titles. And I'm not you, Elle, obviously. You're always like the champion of young adult. It's just, it bothers me because it's like, no, you're talking about different things, and just telling us it feels like young adult is which trend of young adult? Because young adult has had so many trends and things that we can fall into.
Can I elaborate on that? I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just want to say too, because there's nothing wrong with an adult recognizing, like, this isn't for me. I'm not the target demographic. I'm past the point in my life where this is relatable, so it's kind of just hard for me to connect. That's completely understandable. But yes, I agree that a lot of people, I think there's some where I'm like, okay, I can give you some benefit of the doubt. I think that you're saying kind of what I just described, as opposed to, oh, I just can't read young adult now because it's just not even good. And you're just like,
yeah. And normally it means that they don't like certain things that are normally gendered in like ways that are really negative. Like, they don't want the young female protagonist, which is more of a trend in young adult. There's a lot of negativity among the stereotypes that people like latch onto that I don't enjoy. But I also equally like that in adult spaces, I can still, because my definition usually for young adult versus adult, because it can be so in the weeds, is who did the author intend it for? And I just like that this type of sweet fairy tale was intended for me as an adult. And obviously anyone can pick it up and enjoy it, but like, I appreciate that that exists, because like, it's obviously like has a lot of morals that like 30-year-old jaded me kind of appreciated getting to sink into. And obviously younger, older people can also lean into that, but I like that that exists, just because of that. And I also wonder, like, I bet Sanderson would love to have it on a YA shelf, but financially speaking, Tor's not going to want to sell it for cheaper, and YA books in the United States are always $10 cheaper than adult books.
He might figure out a way to.
He has the sway, but the hardback book prices are always $10 different, and I think it's like $6 for the paperback here. I know that's not a thing in the UK, I don't think, but if you're in the United States, which is why, like, with the Hugo, I get really annoyed when people classify stuff like Naomi Novik as young adult. It's like, because that was on your adult shelf. That's where you bought it at the store, because it was on the adult shelf. Like, you didn't go to the YA shelf to find it because it wasn't sold there. It's $10 more. A young adult reader with finite money might not have been able to pick that book up. Like, anyways,
I do think too. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is totally off topic, but I love the way that Jade's child just disappeared into that sofa.
Yeah,
just like inserted into the sofa and gone.
But I really like that this is like a family weight story. Like,
yeah, and I was gonna say, you're talking about how there's things that are written that you feel like it makes you feel like, oh yes, I connect with this. Roger mentioned the anxiety thing, but I also think that there's some things that are really uplifting and kind of important themes for young people to read. And it's not just the subversion of the trope, because he talks about how his wife in watching Princess Bride was like, I wish the Princess Buttercup had a little more agency. I wish she did a little more. But also him kind of, it's that idea of like, I don't need anyone to rescue me, because I think that there is this trend. We're talking about the young female protagonist. There's this trend for the female character to be completely hardened and turning off their emotions and like being tough, when in actuality, I think we need to see more characters like Tress who are openly kind and who are willing, they're humble, and they're just doing their best and recognizing, like Jade's quote about friendship, how important it is to build these connections with people and to to stick up for those that you love, to fight for those who you love, but to allow people to do that for you too. And just like the connections that are so important, not just for adults, but children too. I just think it's a nice, all the messaging is very nice for various different age ranges, this is why I wanted to have criticisms early, because I just knew eventually it would turn into gushing and just like, isn't it perfect? It's not perfect, but I just really always like a story that can have appeal to a lot of ages. I think it's very sweet. What were you gonna say, Roger?
I'll just be curious when people start having their kids read it or whatever, how the kids feel about it, because some of the messaging, I feel like the way that it's worded, I don't know that would resonate with like 10-year-old Roger as much as it resonates with 32-year-old Roger, with like the way that it's phrased and how it's kind of like overtly moral lessons. I don't know that I would have loved it when I was a kid as much.
That will be interesting to see.
That's the thing about a lot of media for children and cartoons and things. Like if you watch them as an adult, you go, this is so inappropriate in so many ways, but the kids, they just don't pick up on that stuff. And so it's doing that thing where it's enjoyable for the kid for the reason that it's enjoyable for a kid, but then it's enjoyable for an adult for the reason that it's enjoyable for an adult. And I think this does that really well.
Yeah, I think
my brain went to trying to classify. I think my brain went to trying to classify like the age range of this book, and if I compare it to other middle grade that I'm reading, tonally it's very different than most of the middle grade that I would pick up. Because I've heard people talking about how like, oh well, it's kind of a middle grade book, and I've heard some of those kinds of complaints, which I think is funny because usually people complain about YA, but then they'll love middle grade, which I always think is kind of just hilarious to me. I'm like, okay, whatever. It's too young for me, but I'll read things written for like 7-year-olds. Okay. But I was just like, go ahead, Al.
Sorry. I was just gonna say Jade's quote about kids being sociopaths. I can see an older sibling being like, "Yeah, exactly," or something, because they feel like, "Yeah, my little brother, my little sister's so annoying." They're, just having that feeling like they feel so grown up. So I can also see some of the wording making them feel like, "Oh yeah, exactly." I think that, but also you're right that some of it feels like not heady, but it just feels like it's more for an adult. There's also moments, though, this is what makes that I find interesting if I were to go back and reread it. There are those moments like the quotes that have been standing out to us that are appealing to us, but then there are moments that feel so much for kids that I wonder if we just kind of don't even think
like
about
the poop
those.
joke. The poop joke. That's like definitely for kids.
Yeah, I can see some.
No, the way I want an animated movie version of this book is it's very high. Like this is like Renaissance era Disney animated movie. It's that weight where you do have the jokes that only the parents understand, and you do have the morals, but you also just have the singing scenes that some of the adults are like, oh my god, I have to hear this song 20 times because my kid's obsessed with it. Like,
yeah. Oh, I think you said it to me that it's kind of like Shrek. Like that's what I think about Shrek. Shrek has so many like inappropriate jokes that would just kind of go over kids' heads, but parents think it's really funny. And I feel like, I mean, not that there were too many inappropriate jokes, but that this transcends age groups, just like I think Shrek does.
And I think that's the fairy tale genre, though. Like the origins of fairy tales was actually just a bunch of women talking to each other and imparting lessons, and then kids would hear about them, but they weren't for kids, but kids could take value in it. And like it's just evolved from there. It's always meant to be the like universal storytelling for Western fairy tales specifically is what I'm looking at. And that's why it's one of my favorites. It's so good.
Well, we have kind of danced around a lot of different topics, and we've a little bit mentioned Cosmere connections. If anybody doesn't want anything spoiled for them about the Cosmere, before we dive into this really quick, now that this is because Angela, now you've got me thinking about this being a movie or something adapted, and saying here it would be a good Disney animated movie. Do we feel like this is potentially his most easily adaptable work at this point?
If it's animated,
it's one of them. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that Elantris is still easier.
Really?
I don't think the audience is there for Elantris. If we're talking about
I just mean from a production perspective. I can see that Elantris would be easier to make. You wouldn't need as many special effects as you would with TRESS, I don't think.
Just make people look like
unless
they're
you did it
dying.
animated.
I'm just like
let
imagining
me do that.
arcane style with the vine. I don't know. I just think animated Tress would be so pretty.
With the like cool spore sea, and
Yeah.
that would be really cool. Okay,
And I
sorry,
think it just-
Cosmere.
Yeah.
Cosmere connections. Is there anything anybody wants to point out? Also, I want to reiterate again, if you don't want Cosmere spoilers, please leave now.
I have a
Don't want
question
it.
for the group because I feel like up to this point in Cosmere life, I never had this question. I feel like Earth was mentioned. And I'm just like,
I thought it because it felt like he was talking to us, like Earth.
yeah, like I felt like the
Well, I
rocket
mean,
ship
like
and the laptops
laptops
was very like Earth is an
specific.
abandoned planet that we used to be on in the far, far past. And
So-
is Earth where Hoid's from? I don't
It
even
makes
know.
me wonder though, because we've talked about not knowing, or I don't know if this group has, but I think people are talking about where does this fit in the Cosmere timeline, and I'm wondering if it's way Mistborn spy era that we haven't gotten,
Mhm.
because that would make sense for. And I don't know, what if like Mistborn gets to a point where it just refers to its planet as Earth or something?
And that
I
is
don't
like
know.
a sci-fi thing. So in sci-fi, because we've been talking about if you read a sci-fi book, it will revert to home planet as Earth and home sun as sun, even if it's not our Earth and our sun. Like
Yeah.
that's a common thing. I just didn't
Yeah.
know if Sanderson was doing that or not.
Yeah. I don't know whether this was a discussion that I had with you, Elle, or a video on your channel, Roger, or maybe both. Or maybe something I read on the Copper Mine. Honestly, I don't know. But at some point, I feel like I've heard discussed or have discussed the fact that this is, in my mind, based so far in the future that, and this is like, I just wanted to say again, this is major Cosmere spoilery. So if you're not caught up, please block your ears. I feel like it's going to be way after Aiden Alcium is reformed or comes back together in some way and forms something completely new. I don't know, but I feel like with that far ahead in the future, and in terms of where it takes place, I think from the speculations that I've seen online, it's Hoid telling the story to people on the planet from Sixth of the Dusk.
And I think too, originally wasn't one of these books supposed to be a character from Stormlight telling the story?
I think that's the fourth one.
Oh, okay. Is that still happening? Okay.
Yeah.
One of them is supposed to be Stormlight adjacent, whatever that
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
Yeah, only thing
Yeah,
I know with time placement is it's after the Mistborn era too. It has to be based off things we were told in the Lost Metal. And if
From
you
what I've
caught the
heard,
history-
it has to be almost Mistborn Era 4, because in Mistborn Era 2, we do not have space age travel.
No.
We don't have
Yeah.
the ability to travel that way. People are still traveling through Shadespar. So this is supposed to be like Six of the Dusk
way
/ Mistborn Era 4, like very when we're in the weeds of the sci-fi-ness of it all. Is
We
what
did kind of
I have heard.
Yeah, I
touch
caught
on
this. Yeah.
we touched on this
And
a little
yes.
bit earlier before we were talking.
Well,
I
that's the
think
thing that
maybe
I'm curious about. This is like the main connection that I'm curious. Like, why is it Sazed by name? Has Sazed somehow given up his shards? Why is it not Harmony? Because clearly Hoid has interacted in Mistborn world, and if we're in the far future, why is it now Sazed? That's the one part that I didn't understand.
I mean, I know
Because if we're
Kelsier
far
also
future
refers to
space
him.
transfer,
I just think sometimes they choose to use Sazed or Harmony interchangeably because Kelsier does the same thing, I think.
Kelsier knew him personally, though. I think that's why
Yeah.
it makes more sense to me that he would refer to him as Harmony.
Well,
Hoid
maybe
would.
that's the thing. We're so far future, we don't have a Harmony anymore.
that's
That's
what
I
I'm
think.
wondering, like, has
That's
he
what
given up
Rogers.
the shard.
Well, that's
And
That's
then,
what
but then
Sophia was
like,
saying.
why
Like,
would
is this when
Sazed?
Adel Nauseam?
Why would Sazed still? Is he still alive then? How is he? If he is, how
Well,
is he?
Yeah, because he's probably a cognitive shadow.
Oh, did they never get to rest? I kind of want to know.
I have no clue.
No.
But
Never.
but Sazed didn't pull a Kelsier, like it's not.
No, but
I mean, I think also
he's a
in that
shadow.
moment, I took it as a reference to when in the Lost Metal, Sazed sends out the Kendra. That's what I took it to, meaning a historical thing, not an ongoing thing Sazed was doing. Like in that moment where he's like, Kendra, explore, Kandra, sorry.
I was gonna say I've never heard you say Kendra before, and then you said Kandra.
I was like, I'm bad at spelling words in English, much less fantasy English. So It gets worse.
Yeah, but
I think I just have
Hoid
Michael
never
Kramer.
met him. Hoid never met him as Sazed because we see him in Mistborn's Secret History. He's kind of passing through the
He was around the crew.
singularity.
He was around
Oh,
the crew in
Jade hasn't
Mistborn
caught
Era
up on
1.
that yet.
Mistborn Era 1, he was around the crew. He wasn't like close, but he was nearby. He would have seen
I don't
Sazed.
I don't
I mean,
think
he's
he
an
would think of
observer.
Sazed as Sazed though. Anyway, I mean, this is where we're all like debating such a specific thing. I want
Well,
to
it's
see
not
the way.
intentional. He
I
chose
wanna
it for a
see-
reason.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, I do wonder because he is so intentional. But I'm
Yeah.
curious how more of because Ulam, I think was his name.
Ulim.
He seemed not at all hiding his.
No.
The Kandra on the
You know,
ship.
so I'm wondering how they're going to be in other Cosmere planets. Are they now just like, this is what I mean? Some of them have to, because eventually he wants to write a spy novel. Will the main character be a Kandra? You know what I mean? Are we going to
Would
see
have
them?
to be, surely.
And
Would be
I
such a
never,
missed opportunity if not.
I never saw it, but didn't one of the Mission Impossibles, like there's a big joke about everybody was in disguise as someone else or something. I'm like,
Yes.
is that going to be eventually the Mistborn? That's where
I
we're
think
going. Is like it's always a Kandra. That's the turn. That's the reveal. I don't know. That'd be interesting. Sorry. Anyway, other Cosmere connections besides just Sazed's name. We talked about the
I mean,
magic.
obviously,
a little bit.
About
Elantris.
Ulam real quick. At some point towards the end, he apparently is a doctor. Like the whole book, he just is referred to as Ulam, and then all of a sudden it's Dr. Ulam, and I'm like, what?
They brought that up earlier. You might have just
Yeah.
missed it.
Oh, okay.
He was
I
the
probably
medic
missed
the
it.
entire time. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not that important.
Yeah, no, I didn't know when that changed, but I guess maybe it was like that the whole time. But there were definitely points where he just was referred to as Ulam and not Dr. Ulam, and I was like, what is happening?
Well, I think because Hoid knows him personally, or
Mhm.
like, so
Yeah.
it depends. Were we in Hoid's narration or was Tress interact? And I think that might have been the difference.
Okay, that's probably what it was.
No, Ulam was a trip. That was fun.
Mhm.
When did you guys realize what he was?
I
Oh,
had a-
immediately.
I had a guess, but it wasn't confirmed till Sazed's name was dropped. Because I'm like, if you
Okay.
feel like a Kandra, I think you are. And then when Hoid
See,
had
I
that
was
thought, I was
going down a totally different road. I was talking to Elle about this. I thought he was, I don't remember what they're called, but whatever pattern is, I thought he was one of those because at the end of Oathbreaker, Wit finds one of those, or Hoid finds one of those, and because they were like together, and just I knew he was like a Cosmere thing. I thought he was one of those things.
Mm.
Yeah, I was pretty sure immediately when he kept wanting body parts. I was
Yeah,
like,
that's
and this
totally
is
what
Kandra. I shouldn't laugh, but
that's how I
don't
am
know why
with a lot of Cosmere reveals. That's me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be is I thought that previously the only magic that we had taken off world was allomancy, and now we clearly had light weaving, we had aeons, we had magic from Elantris off world. So I'm just curious how we're getting to that point. I feel
Warbreaker
like-
took its magic off world. It was in Rhythm of War.
Yeah.
It's a tiny.
Awakening was there.
It's you see a tiny bit with I'm totally forgetting his name.
Vasher or whatever.
But I thought Stormlight was so intrinsically tied to Roshar that they couldn't take it off world. That's like one of the main challenges that they're trying to figure out, right?
Yeah. I think Stormlight is kind of the start of investiture moving around the Cosmere, the different types of investiture. And because this is so far in the future, or at least we presume that it is because of the technology, that we can, or I am going to assume that means that at some point in Stormlight they're going to figure it out.
Especially with Kelsier, kind of showing up in Stormlight and making me and everything. Kelsier's so obsessed with the way in which you can use spikes to kind of solidify yourself and different powers. I'm wondering if there's going to be something to that to Roger's point of like how you can use it outside of Roshar. So Roger, your point is you thought Roshar, you couldn't use that magic elsewhere, but you can use other magic in Roshar. Is that what you were
I
saying?
thought that was even something that they were doing in Stormlight, that they were trying to figure out how, that there was some kind of commentary somewhere about how like they couldn't figure out how to take it off world.
Yeah, no, that is a thing.
Yeah.
But I think they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly, because we just had light weaving in a somewhere not Roshar.
Well, and like
Yeah,
obviously
it'd
this
be
witch is
interesting.
like one of our original like 17, 18 individuals who were at the Shattering or something, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Did anyone recognize the name Rena or whatever? Like I've never seen that name before.
I can look it up. How is it spelled?
Riina.
I don't know
Or-
like anyone but like Hoid from the Shattering.
I don't know if you want the answer to that question.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I keep pulling my headphone out because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, they're gonna say something.
Is it
I
something
it's
know
fine,
the
I'm not-
answer, and you don't want it.
Okay. Okay.
Wait, I guess
I-
vaguely, Sophia, what book gives it to us? Because I've read them all, and I'm curious.
Jade, take the. It's in Secret History. She's one of the Elantrian.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Has Jade not read Secret History? I guess not, because she
Mm-mm.
hasn't read it or two. You can come back.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you guys was, well, I mentioned earlier that I thought the green spores and the vines reminded me a lot of like the whole lift vine situation,
Mm.
but also just the spore seeds, like the way they're described. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of Shadesmar with like the spears
Yeah.
and stuff, right? Like, am I crazy or is that
No, I completely agree. Wouldn't that
Okay.
be bizarre if this was just somewhere on Shadesmar?
Well, and that's
I
kind of
don't-
what I was thinking when Roger was talking about how you can't take magic and they're trying to like do it through
Mm.
Shadesmar. And I was like, well, maybe this is some form of Shades, like Shadesmar in the far future. I don't know.
Well, like I think it.
But I was also
Shadesmar
thinking that
functions
because I
similarly.
thought that the Conjure guy was one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where I was coming with the Shadesmar. But anyway.
Well, I do think the whatever, I forget the name of what the spores are and what they're from, and they're important because they're all Cosmere thingies. Ether. I do think Lift is very special, right? Like, because Lift is always brought up as like, why can you get
Yeah.
investiture straight from food? And they were always
Yeah.
weirded out that her stuff is so tangible for her type of knight. Like, her
Mhm.
knight isn't supposed to be exactly how she is with how corporeal her cognitive plane buddy is.
Mhm.
So I definitely saw that too. I don't have answers,
Right.
but I saw
That's
it.
the thing is I kept saying like, well, this reminds me of this and this reminds me of this, but I
Mhm.
don't actually know like how they are connected. So
He hasn't made that connection yet, right? Because even in the postscript, he talks about how there will be more talk of ethers in the future, as this is not the primary planet that they originated upon.
Yeah.
yeah, I did catch that.
Yeah, and we're only like, I feel like my first interaction with ethers was just like the last book that came out by Sanderson. So I'm still very baby mode on whatever ethers are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's always something.
He has a Prime novel out, I think, on his website.
The Way of
Of
King's
the
The Way of
Prime.
Ethers.
Kings, yeah.
No, a different one where he deals with ethers. But I think he's gonna, the same way as he did with Way of Kings, I think he'll probably diverge from that when he eventually gets around to writing Dragonsteel. But yeah.
I like how the magic system of the ethers are separate from the magics of the shards, because I think that's like really interesting that we now have these two sources of affecting the physics of this universe.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and it feels like the ethers are actually more magical to me. I know we were talking about how they felt like tools, but to me, they felt more magical than a lot of the shards-based magic, which feels more biological, or like they feel like they have more coded ways of working with them, I guess.
I wanted to ask you guys, so the black spores that create these like shadow creatures, I feel like that reminds me of something else that I've read, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Like, what is that a connection to? Is that something?
You don't want the answer to that
Oh,
either,
okay.
Jade. Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, I feel like that it like, I don't know, it just felt familiar and like I've read that before, but I couldn't remember what from. And
So, do we
have
want
kind of a bad
to?
memory.
Do we want to do another moment of Jade just covers her ears and Sophia
Go ahead.
says,
Go ahead.
It's an Emperor's Soul kind of connection.
"Okay, hold
Well,
on."
has Jade read Emperor's Soul? Can't remember that either.
Jade,
Well,
come
the
back.
reason I don't want to say is, hang on, sorry.
I understand. I get it.
Because it links through to Lost Metal.
Yeah.
That's why
I appreciate it.
I told Jade, because she was asking me, she's getting back into reading, and she's like, what should I read? And I was telling her, she was asking me about the Cosmere read along, and I was telling her I was going to read White Sand, and she was like, I'm not sure if I want to read White Sand. I'm like, there's so many times when something will pop up in the Cosmere and I'm like, what is this? And someone will be like, it's from White Sand. And I'm like, dang it. So I feel like all these little.
But we're going to get a re-release soon, and I don't want to go through it.
Also, Jade, just to be clear, that is not the thing that Sophia just mentioned. I didn't just spoil exactly what you stopped
I actually wanted to ask about White Sand. So I have Arcanum Unbounded, and I have it on ebook. Is White Sand in it?
The novelization.
No, White Sand is a
version
graphic novel.
Right. So I was confused. So there is a novelization. Is it the same? Like, can I read the novelization and not the graphic novel?
He said recently in A State of Sanderson he's going to revamp stuff, so you can, but who knows how canon it'll be.
Okay. All right. Well,
so
I would
really
just
quick,
wait, because I think the new one's coming out this summer, right? Where they're doing it and he's making it more Cosmere-ish.
Oh.
So there's
and on his website there's like a novelization version, or I think in my book there's one, but I don't know. I haven't read either.
It has been almost an hour and a half. I'm going to end on a sassy note.
Oh.
So people in the chat, you can weigh in on this too. Do you think saying Tress of the Emerald Sea is the title of the book is a spoiler?
No.
Okay, Jade is sweet and doesn't know this whole situation. Jade, there were a lot of people upset at reviewers because when the book was released, a lot of people were putting up the reviews and it would say, you know, Secret Project Run 1, Tress of the Emerald Sea, or they put Tress of the Emerald Sea review, and a bunch of people were like, you spoiled that for me, and people were mad. And I even
so go to the bookstore.
Well, Patrick's the one. I wish Patrick was still here. Patrick was the one that brought this to my attention, and Sean even said in my review, one of the later comments, because mine says non-spoiler review, and someone's like, there's a spoiler in the title of the video, and I was like, what? And it's because, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I understand if you don't want to know the title until you get your book, maybe you're waiting for the physical copy or something, and if that is the case, I completely understand, but I'm still gonna talk about the book. And Sanderson, Roger was saying even Sanderson was on the Dragonsteel Instagram page, I think, like they were saying the name of it. They're releasing the artwork from the book.
It was literally released.
Yeah.
Well,
I will say,
he waited
as
until it was available to people not on the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
He waited until like the 10th of January.
The 10th, yeah.
But I will say, as someone who was like, okay, I put this completely on myself as my responsibility as someone who's like, I want to know as little as possible, so it's on me to hide myself from whatever's happening. And then on January 1st, I opened my email because that's when it happened, because presumably if you cared that much, you backed the Kickstarter. If you didn't back the Kickstarter and you are dying on this hill, I don't understand.
Oh, okay. I was like, I didn't back the Kickstarter, but I'm not dying on this hill, so I'm okay.
But you know what I'm saying? Like the people who are like, oh my God, you ruined this. I'm like, January 1st, you can open your inbox. It's right there.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure on January 1st, the title was revealed on Amazon as well, because I was able to pre-order it.
I will say, for anybody that maybe couldn't afford it at the time and then later purchased it as like, and they had to wait for that pre-order date, I can maybe see. I do want to say, and this is not me being snarky, I'm being totally serious, you can turn off notifications from YouTube so that you don't see that, you know, if somebody's review pops up in your subscription feed or something, you can turn off notifications. You know, you can, and I'm not trying to be snarky or be like, it's on you, but I guess I
will be snarky.
I was about to say, it is on you how much you care about spoilers. If you interact with the book internet, that's on you a little.
Yeah.
I just think it's so dumb. We talk about every other book by its title and its cover. I get that this was a weird moment in history that you had one of your favorite authors where you had this really weird experience where you could go into something completely blind.
And
but just knowing the title tells you nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't
so
tell
stupid.
you. Her name is Tress, and the sea is emerald, I guess.
Yeah. And also,
it
the covers for the Secret Project 1 show you a sea. Like, I don't know. I think for me, I was happy I knew nothing about the synopsis or anything. That was more what was fun for me, is like, oh my God, it's January 1st, and I get a fairy tale story from Sanderson. This is amazing. Like, that was a great moment.
I had no idea what I was going into. I didn't read the preview chapters. I didn't look into the synopses besides to figure out which ones were Cosmere related, which you could do without finding the actual synopsis. And like, but the title, I saw people commenting and being all mad about it. And I'm like, get out of here. Then you should have been waiting for it to drop into your inbox at midnight on January 1st if you were that sensitive about it. Because
the ebooks were actually pretty reasonably priced on the Kickstarter. I mean, granted, yes, everyone has different means, but like 4 ebooks for like $50 is That's like a
No, I
standard
gotta
rule.
say, I pulled a little bit of a Roger earlier when he was like, "Well, I guess the criticisms could be," and you mentioned other people's. I feel like I was like, "What do all of you think?" And then all of you are kind of,
Monster.
Yeah, no.
I a little bit was like, all right. I mean, I'm going to discuss the book, and if you don't want to see that, if you want to unsubscribe, like I don't blame you because do what works best for you. But I also there's a little part of me that's like, do you expect all these people whose channels are dedicated to books and reviewing books and discussing books aren't going to discuss? It's not like when the MCU has a big release and everyone's like, don't talk spoilers until, whatever date or something. It's not even that. It's like the title. When did we collectively decide we wouldn't say the title? I think that's the part that I missed. I'm like, I'm not on Twitter. I didn't know that I
I
wasn't
think
supposed
people were
to
trying
say.
to not do it until it released.
Yeah.
But
Which
what
is
do you
fine.
consider the release date? January 1st, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then,
Yeah,
like, what's
I
the big
did.
Well, and like, I
Exactly.
felt really bad for Tor Publishing because they got thrown under the bus. So when Tor got to reveal that they had access to the physical release of the books, like Sanderson's team has complete say over what happens with Sanderson's publishing. Like I have a friend at Tor who was telling me all of this because it was such a mess. And they released the titles when they released that they were in April publishing the books. And they got so much flack on social media for doing that. But it wasn't even the Tor's team that did that. Like someone on Sanderson's team okayed it and like dropped the ball, but Tor was getting all the backlash.
I do want to say too, that's the thing is, I think that at some point it's like, because I think Sanderson had said somewhere at some point, because Roger, I thought you even told me like
It was in his Kickstarter thing that he was going to keep it a secret.
No, but he posted on Instagram that now, or no, it was in one of his weekly updates on YouTube that he talked about. I'm now using the title. It's fine. Like, get over it.
Now that people have access to the title, I'm using the title. But my point that I was saying is, I don't think people are gonna spit out that same level of anger at Sanderson himself. But you'll come for the reviewers. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, plus, what do you expect us to do? How are people going to find the review? People are not searching Secret Project 1. They're going to be searching the name of the actual book. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, Secret Project Run will probably pop up at this point, but I agree that, I don't know.
Also, most
Not if you're trying
fantasy
to
titles are
SEO.
just really bad at telling you what a book's about. Like, the average fantasy title does not tell me what's happening in that book. It's always like a fancy noun or a person in a place. Like...
He did
like TRESS in the Emerald Sea, a person in a place.
Well, I was just thinking the Jasmine throne, so that's like a fancy throne. Like everything's always like a fancy noun, a place in a place, something of a kingdom. I'm just
gonna say, for anybody that's still, if you are still here when this eventually goes live on my channel, that I will use the names of the books for the future reviews, and if that bothers you, that's okay. But that's what I'm going to do. So there's my warning. I'm still going to call them.
Is it okay, Elle? You're judging them. We know it. No.
It's just, everybody has different sensitivity levels, I think, when it comes to spoilers. And
But that's
fine.
next level. That's not a spoiler.
I know,
that's not
but you
spoiling
have
anything
to
about
take
the book.
responsibility for your... So, like, for example, I know I'm in the UK, and so it's going to take me a lot longer to get any of the Year of the Sanderson boxes than people in the States. So I'm already seeing people unboxing them on their Instagrams, and I just have to take responsibility.
Oh, like the Hoid box or whatever it was
that
he sent out?
For skipping past those stories and not spoiling myself. It's on me. It's not on the people that have got the box already to protect me. It's my job to do that. If I don't want to know, then I have to be the one to avoid the information. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that after a book is released, somebody would say, "Oh, you're spoiling me," like with the title. No, I'm not. You're an idiot. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think I've ever heard Sophia call someone. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I just feel like, Sophia, you and I are similar, and like I would love to be as completely neutral as possible going into a thing. I don't want stuff, but like we know it's not the internet's fault.
It's not realistic. Yeah.
No, it's like
you have to stay off Twitter then. Or not follow
I
the
just
book.
want to stay in my house with the windows closed off, the TV turned off, no media at all until I get this book in the mail. Except I won't know when it arrives because
it's
I've locked
quarantine
myself
again.
in my room.
It's quarantine until it's released for everybody, and then we can all go outside again. And we can all
because if I don't have mine, then I don't care.
Anyway,
Yeah, 'cause this is
I
not
think
like spoilers. Like on the internet, if you're on Twitter, Twitter is the worst for spoilers. Because like I had to stop following RuPaul's Drag Race because the next day they would always show an interview with the person who got eliminated the night before, and I was like, "Excuse you."
Yeah, you have to
That's
learn who to
spoilers.
follow. You have to learn how to scroll real fast and find out within the first 2 words if this is going to be a spoiler tweet or not.
Sorry. When I get passionate about something, it's just I can't help myself.
Yeah.
the word that I would use that I feel like isn't polite, but it feels a little entitled. Like it feels like you're asking all of every other fan to not discuss it. Because my thing is, what do you think's going to happen? I guess, that people are going to read it as soon as it is in their inbox. As soon as they can, they're going to be picking up that book and reading it. And then as soon as they can, they're going to be eager to talk about it with other people. That's why I was saying it's literally a space of bookworms excited to talk about books. And if you don't want to see, I do think that the responsibility kind of falls on your shoulders a little. But again, I understand if you weren't expecting it to pop up in your inbox, like your subscription feed, which is why I'm like, you can turn notifications off. That I do that because I can't keep up. I have literally, I showed this to Patrick one day. I have, let's see, where my email is. I have like categorizations, but there's like over 6,000. I'm like, I don't need even more, which is why I have my YouTube notifications turned off because I have like notifications for everything turned off.
Yeah.
So I just can't. So for me, I think that I understand if you don't want to see it. And that's why I was saying I'm not trying to be snarky when I say you can just turn off.
See, but you're so understanding. Why do people care about the title? What about the title is spoilery at all?
Also, like,
I get that you don't want to see what the beautiful edition
TRESS.
looks like.
Well,
I get that you don't want to know, maybe, but still, like, it's the title of a book. That's how we talk about books. We say, this is the book, this is the author. Here's my thought. Like, how?
Right.
What?
I can understand if someone got an
art.
Oh, I was gonna say I can understand if somebody got an arc and then they did a spoiler review. Of course, that makes sense. Like nobody has.
But hopefully they would label it spoilered. I would get being mad at them if they didn't mark it spoilered or they said spoiler free, and then they went in on like Cosmere connections. I could get being pissed. But the title of the book, children, please, no.
It's literally like it reminds me of like when like big movies come out, like especially MCU movies and stuff like that. It's like that's on me to get that ticket and go see that as soon as I can if I care.
Right. It's like when Game of Thrones was coming out, I would not get on Twitter until after I'd watched the next episode because
that's how I was with House of the Dragon. I couldn't let myself on Twitter until I watched, and that was on me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think it truly, I agree with the idea of what are you even spoiling? I guess it truly is just you're spoiling the title. And there's a part of me that's like, this is where the lack of understanding comes in, where I'm like, who cares? Why do you care? Like, okay, you're going to learn the title. It's a title. We all it's known that we're going to know the title of a book. Unless the title had a spoiler in it, I don't understand why knowing the title is ruining your day to a point where you would be rude.
You know that first.
Yeah. I guess what I don't understand is I'm trying to be understanding, but the lack of understanding that is given towards people who are talking about the book and like how rude and whatnot that people can be about this. I'm just like, you're the Sanderson fandom is pretty tame and nice, but this is the kind of stuff that makes people not like fantasy fandoms. So don't be that 10% that annoys people.
Like honestly,
it's that thing of sorry.
Well, no, I was just people say things in comments that they would never say like out loud, and people really need to like check their filter. Just like
keyboard warriors.
Like if you want to type it, if you're mad at any of us, you can type it and then take 10 seconds to think. Think like Tress. Should I send this? Is this a thing I should do? Is it nice?
Well, except you can't think by Tress because you are trying not to know who Tress is.
Maybe after they read this book, they will have a sense of, maybe I should. So maybe there's the theme.
Like once I posted a video once and they were like, I think your graphs are wrong. Meanwhile, I spend like an hour doing this video. It's like, even if it's wrong, don't tell me. Like, what are we doing? But it wasn't wrong. They just didn't read the graphs. But don't tell me that my hobby graphs are wrong. These are my hobby graphs and I don't care. I don't want to know.
Because it's just so weird, because for every other book release, you literally know the title before you even see a cover. Like, the title is the first thing you know.
Maybe these people are just putting on blindfolds, walking into libraries, picking books off the shelves, going home and opening the cover and reading them, and then looking at the title afterwards.
Wow! What is this?
The target of this book was just entitled.
Maybe that's a video concept that we should all try.
I like
to
how,
not read the title, get somebody in our lives to put like paper over the cover and the title and just read it.
I really
Kinda like
that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Jade. No, go ahead.
I would say kind of like blind date with a book, but keep it the blind date the whole time.
Extra level blind date with a book.
Yeah.
You have to also like cover the top of every page, because I feel like titles are usually like...
Can't wait to get to the end of the book and learn the title.
One thing I was say earlier. Oh, I forgot you were. Go ahead, Elle. I'm so sorry.
No. I was just. I'm not saying anything worthwhile. I'm just commenting on the fact that I knew that this would happen, and it makes me kind of happy. I mean, I knew if I was just like, let's just let other people talk about it.
Yeah. I have to go in a few minutes, but I just wanted to say one more thing that is not related to TRESS at all. It's related to something Sophia said earlier about the Arithmetus series and how, like, he mentions that all chapters.
Alcatraz, she mentioned.
Alcatraz.
I mentioned Arithmetus, but you're talking about Alcatraz.
Okay. The one about chapters should have names too. I totally agree, but they should not have only names. Anytime I try to do a buddy read or a book club with a book that only has chapter names and no numbers,
yes,
it is such a mess. People have different editions. Like, it is one of my pet peeves. Yeah, sure, put a name on it. That's fun. But at least still number it. Like, that's such
Game
an
of
easy
Thrones
thing
is the
to
worst.
do.
You would. Don't do a buddy read for Alcatraz.
Multiple things that I have to say. Something about your fake background when your like arms did this. It looked like you suddenly had arms. But also, my husband is currently reading a Cormac McCarthy book with his dad. They are doing it as a buddy read, and I could overhear them this morning like trying to figure out where, because one of them has a physical copy, one of them has a Kindle, and the pages aren't the same. There's no chapters, and there's like not a lot of punctuation in those books, which that doesn't really contribute to where you are, I guess. But it's like I could just hear them. Sean was like, "There's something about I thought I heard him say something about like a trash and overalls or something," and I'm just like, the level that they have to go to try to figure out where they're supposed to read to is amusing. I agree, and I also hate when audiobooks don't line up with the chapters in a book.
I hate that.
Oh, this is
I feel like publishers need to be aware that people read books together these days. We're not in the 80s, 90s. We're like reading with such a solitary activity. That's how I think about it, because I grew up, obviously we all grew up reading more like alone, but now like reading is much more of a community thing. And but yeah, I just feel like publishers need to be a little more aware that people try to read things together and try to like sync these things, because anytime we get a book club book and it's a book that has no numbered chapters, it drives me absolutely insane.
Yeah. Well,
like
you said
reading Game of Thrones was so frustrating because we had to like look up the order and be like, okay, is it Daenerys 4 or 6? And then like in the book, it's not published, so you have to like either count or have like a chart. It's stupid.
It's so hard.
I really quick just want to say Jade has to go soon, and also I figured this would probably be a good time to be wrapping up because we've been chatting for a while. We're starting to talk about pet peeves, which could be an entire video all in its own.
Well, my pet peeve was going to be related to TRESS.
Okay, then go for it.
Why does Michael Kramer have a monopoly on every male voice in the frickin' Cosmere? It's driving me up the wall.
Why? Because you don't like
A,
it.
he doesn't work for me, which I get that's subjective, but B, anyone could have been Hoid. Anyone. We could have had David Tennant. But no.
I like Michael Kramer, so I know Angela
I understand.
doesn't,
I was so excited to listen to the audiobook. I did the Spotify code, and then I realized who it was. And I was like, oh, I can't do this because
I feel like you should have known who it was going to be. I think that they have probably like a contract, because they
did like a thing on Reddit to like, I think for these 4 books, in theory, it could have been different people, but I don't know because I didn't look it up. I was just sad because specifically his narration reminds me of reading Wheel of Time, which is not what I want to think
It doesn't make you think of reading.
I have it the other way around.
Yeah.
Well, I
I
just
was gonna say,
whenever
I'm
he
like-
uses his Matt Coffin voice, which he uses quite often, I get mad.
So one of the reasons why I thought Ulam was one of those pattern creatures that I can't
Oh,
remember
the
what they're called
voice.
was
Red.
the voice. Like the voice that
Ah.
he uses for Ulam is one that I've heard before. So I thought he was someone I had met before, but
Yeah, I mean,
you
he
can only
gives
have so many voices, I
Lopin-
guess.
he gives Lopin and Wayne the same voice,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
kind of Australian.
Which Lopin's not Australian. Lopin is central to South. Anyways, I just get annoyed. Also, him and Kate Redding, when they do stuff together and they live together, they don't talk
They-
to each other.
Always give the
They just-
same, like, yeah, and they don't always, I think, pronounce everything exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have a goal. One of my goals this year is to try a little bit to not go too off the path with collaborations. So I don't. I'm trying to wrap it up before we end up talking for over 2 hours, and we're talking about like audiobooks and book pet peeves and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was lots of fun,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope everybody, whatever your thoughts are when you join the chat. If you do want to talk Cosmere spoilers in your comment, just make sure you mark Cosmere spoilers. But if you're talking TRESS live TRESS spoilers, just go for it, because that's what this video is. And if people come to this video and they look at the comments and they get mad they're spoilers, that's on them. That's
in the
theme,
title.
I guess. It's in the title. Yeah. TRESS of
Which
the
you
Emerald
have to
Sea
read.
spoiler
Yeah.
discussion. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the discussion and the sass at the end of the discussion. I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you all later. Bye.
Bye.